Have you checked the children? You're a little mad sometimes.
Hi, I'm Chucky. Wanna play?
Sometimes that is better.
You're gonna need a bigger boat.
Bleedings and salutations, Fright fans. Jaime and Fuego here for the horror show. Bienvenidos and welcome for another Patreon review, the last that I am putting together today. And John Farrelly, much love to you, dude. This one is a long time coming, so thank you for bearing with us as the channel was tacked and taken over for a few weeks, and we're still kind of trying to get caught up on a lot of the requests. So thank you so very much for your patience and your support, supremely appreciated. And this is all about my thoughts briefly on a 2016 film called Bedeviled. And so I have to give a mention to the team that directed this. So it is, oh, come on, where the heck did the names go? It is, okay. They did a film that I watched earlier this year called They Live in the Gray. So it is Abel Vang and Burley Vang. So the team behind Bedeviled here, the directing tandem, they did a film called They Live in the Gray that I was quite impressed by. Really, really enjoyed. Bedeviled, unfortunately, John, I'm going to say that I was not impressed, regrettably. So, overall thoughts, it's borrowing from too many tropes, everything from It to Nightmare on Elm Street a little bit, to even some films that came later on about, like, you know, evil apps on your phone and stuff like that. I know that other people have done it both before and after, and so from a stylistic standpoint, a lot of the color correction was too much for me, you know, the dark, you know, blacks and blues and whatnot. The acting, despite being a very pretty cast, was nothing that really felt like from an acting standpoint. I mean, they weren't awful, but they were about as run-of-the-mill, like, teen sort of situation as a lot of people would expect from, you know, films like this. It very much felt to me like something I would have seen in the late 90s, early 2000s, like direct-to-video sector. Maybe because of the fact that the budget was a slight bit bigger, it could have ended up in a brief run in theaters. But I mean, I think the IMDb is like 4 out of 10, so not very glowing in that regard. And unfortunately, at least for my money, not very original. If you're gonna watch something by this tandem, you have to watch They Live in the Gray. I thought it was significantly superior. But back to Bedeviled, so I've made my thoughts known that I did not like this, unfortunately. But from a storytelling standpoint, so there is a character by the name of Nikki who the film opens up with, and so right at the beginning she seems very detached and out of it, and her mom comes to ask her if she's okay at one particular point, and you can tell she's troubled, she's out of it, whatever, and she dies. And you can tell that there is some evil presence that she sees in her darkened home that is responsible for said situation. And then it's really all of her friends trying to pick up the pieces as to how she died, like what sort of clues there may be. And the biggest one that they get is where it's been a few days since the funeral / memorial, whatever, and they all get this app request for something, you know, called it's like Mr. Bedevil or the Bedevil or whatever. And it's apparently something like a Siri where, you know, you talk to it and the AI within the app talks back to you, but it's the overly intuitive aspect and the you know, essence of personal information that this thing is capable of, that the fact that these kids so naively go through with it. And yes, I know, John, that it's a horror movie, and, you know, just check your brain in at the door, and you know, just don't try to overanalyze sort of stuff. But these kids are just dumb, in my opinion. And some of the justification, I guess, makes sense. You know, they're like, well, it's able to look at your contacts and your Facebook, and I know that there is a savviness to a lot of these programs that steal your personal information. And like when I have an app that wants to track my location and all of my doings on every other app that I'm on, and they're like, such and such is tracking your, you know, activity on every other app you're using, and I'm just like, wait, what? So yeah, a little ahead of its time, I suppose. Or, I mean, shit, maybe this has been a thing for the last, like, you know, 6, 8, 10 years, whatever. It probably has, now that I think about it, because smartphones have been around for far longer than that. But yeah, it's just the fact that it goes kind of Freddy Krueger status with it. So this app, it is able to make a manifestation sort of thing as it's going after this circle of friends, all like for anybody in that circle of Nikki's friends who, you know, brought on the app. and downloaded it onto their phones. And so the fact that it's epitomizing personal fears, which is the tie-in with the Freddy sort of connection. And yeah, whether it's, said black dude who was like, oh, weird white people and cops, and then there's another kid who's scared of clowns, hence the Pennywise It connection, and then there's another bit with like a theatrical sort of standpoint for this girl who's doing some Shakespeare, and then there's another bit with like a killer bear. It's like all of the different tropes that we have seen in various other horror stories, like this flick like cherry picked like all of them in a lot of ways. And I find that to be kind of a bummer, because from at least the technological standpoint, some of the discussion within that, and as they explored a little bit more in the back half of the second and then into the third act, that's a little bit more intriguing than just unoriginal set piece after unoriginal set piece, with all of these kids. And I mean, acting is fine, with, of course, we've got our pretty blue-eyed blondie, who is our lead, who was the best friend of Nikki, who passed away, and she's fine, I guess. And there is the, I mean, when the presumed Asian kid and the black kid are both written relatively stereotypically and not like fleshed out to the degree that I would have personally preferred, and it just veers into those sort of tropes that I don't personally like. But yet even the dumb white girls in this were very tropey as well. So I mean, not a lot of character development, in both the writing or the aspect, of the nuance of the acting. Even early on, where they're all having this scene where they're sitting around in this restaurant and they're just like telling the most generic recollections of this particular friend of theirs that was mysteriously lost in such a sudden fashion. It just did not exude the sort of sincerity from both performance or from the dialogue that was written for these kids to really get to it. And yet there was also another classroom scene, and I assume these were college kids, or maybe they were like at the tail end of high school. I don't know. They definitely look like college kids, but they're all still living with parents and whatnot, so I don't friggin' know. Anyway, there's an instructor, a teacher, who was talking about the essence of fear, and there's some inquiries from some of the students about, can fear kill you? And he talks about how fear can at least debilitate an immune system if you constantly have that, just like that fearful anxiousness and whatnot. So that's obviously a thing. But the instructor is talking about, like, he starts making some like odd sexual references. Like, he's talking with these kids about, fear is the same as like, the thrill of an orgasm or whatever. And you're just like, what? This guy's a pervo, dude. I would imagine there's all kinds of creepazoid instructors both in the high school and the collegiate sort of area. I guess in the collegiate area it would be less frowned upon or felt as weird, but I don't know. The times they have changed, and thankfully a lot of that sort of just fishing behavior by a lot of these really perverted instructors, doesn't happen as prevalently, or if so, it's reported, and they get themselves in some serious ass trouble. But yeah, it's really, at the end of the day, the unoriginality of this. It feels so by the numbers. It's like along the lines of some of the Blumhouse crap, like Truth or Dare, or the Fantasy Island, horror reimagining that they did. Or yeah, it's of that ilk, where it's like, okay, been there, done that. What new are you bringing here? And from that technological standpoint, it was just a little bit of the exploration here and there that made things a little more interesting. But the manifestation, and that's where I will at least say the effects aren't bad in this, whether it's creepy elderly grandparent or the smile that is so prevalent of the bedeviler, whatever the hell. It is in the red bow tie that is another like calling card / warning sign of sorts. But really the kills, and there's nothing particularly graphic. A lot of death happens off screen. I mean, when the first one does not go all Drew like at the beginning of Scream, it just cuts away and like, hey, we're starting the movie and we're at the funeral sequence. So, but there are at least, I like the teddy bear. There's also, in the third act, there's another character that is besieged by this pale, black and gross, like nastiness humanoid of sorts, without me getting into too many details as to why and, that particular connection. But yeah, John, I was not particularly into this one, and I think Marcia watched it and didn't want to sit in on this review because we were talking about doing it a few weeks ago. So it had merits in some of the filmmaking prowess, which is why I point back to the fact that this tandem of directors went on to use the visual, stylistic sort of skill that I saw in this movie, and in They Live in the Gray, they applied it to a better script. And that film is on Shudder, and I recommend everybody to check it out. Bedeviled is on Tubi, if you want kind of a Nightmare on Elm Street-ish ripoff that doesn't really bring much of anything fresh to the table, and cops a bunch of other bits from other films and horror tropes and such. So, it's going to be the end of my thoughts, unfortunately. So, a grande gracias from all of us at the Horror Show. Myself, Cecil, Robert, Marcia, Susie, Andrew, the entire gang. And yeah, if you would like to become a patron yourself, or if you are at a lower tier and would like to actually suggest something to us to review, you can have all of that information in the description box below. Some of these migrate from the Patreon over to the main channel, but the predominance of them remain unlisted, and the only way that you can watch them is here on the Patreon. So like, share, subscribe. It still helps us out, even with an unlisted video, to do that. So make sure to do that so you get notifications about when we put our main videos on as well. Bigger stuff like The Sadness and A24's newest, which is Men, from Alex Garland, the director of Ex Machina and Annihilation. So that's some recent stuff that we have done, as well as we sometimes veer into the super mainstream, like Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness. Cecil and I checked that out recently. So yeah, that's the end of the proceedings, Fright fans. Once again, thank you so very much. Danke, arigato, merci. That's the end of the reviews for yours truly today. And until next time, Fright fans and all who adore the spectacular, remember to stay scared.